I'm Jim Czek. You're watching Now Media. I have with me Mary Canseco, pollster from Research Co. Wild, 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 wild election, right?
It's the one of the oldest ones that I've seen. I think the thing that really stands out when you look at the numbers is we're used to seeing the center left vote coalesce around the Liberals in the final stages of the campaign, when voters are wondering if they're better served by choosing a government or a color of government or choosing the candidate in the riding or the party in the riding that they like. And in this case, it started right after Mark Carney visited the Governor General. We saw a collapse in the vote of the NDP, a significant drop for the Greens. Even the Bloc is suffering from the fact that you have so many people coalescing around the Liberals. And the final 4 days are going to be crucial to this. Are we going to be in a situation where more people feel the same way, or are the numbers going to tighten up and we'll be in for a significantly closer election?
Yeah, the numbers have changed quite a bit because for a while there it looked like it was going to be this liberal supermajority, and but lately it has tightened up. And if you look at the numbers, I mean, from where I'm looking at them, it doesn't look like Polyev has lost a lot of support. It's just that the Liberals have gained a lot of support, like you were saying, from the NDP and from the Bloc, and that and they kind of like combining all that effort into one.
Well, you look at the past two elections where essentially liberals and conservatives get 33, 32% of the vote. Right now, the conservatives at the national level, we have them at 38. That would be enough for a majority government in any other occasion.
Yeah.
But the fact that you have the NDP votes really dropping drastically, I mean, they're holding on to 39% of their voters from 2021. That's why they're in single digits. That's why the effort to try to save as many seats as you can, particularly here in British Columbia, has been so crucial. And it's a very different situation from elections in the past, where you don't have that type of scenario on the Tuesday and Wednesday prior to election day. To have Jagmeet Singh going back to his writing, talking about sending more New Democrats from British Columbia to Ottawa, that's not the campaign that they started with. They started with Jagmeet Singh essentially trying to see himself as somebody who was in contention with Carney and with Polyev for the top job in the country.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of people out there saying that it looks like Jagmeet Singh has actually thrown the election and like basically done everything he could to kind of destroy the NDP party, and I mean that doesn't make a lot of sense. Tom Mulcair actually came out and said that the former NDP leaders came out and said that you shouldn't vote for the NDP, and that's not very good. He came out and said that you should vote for either blue or liberals or the red, but obviously that's leaning more towards the Liberals because it's very hard to get an NDP voter to vote for the Conservatives.
Well, one area where we're seeing that happen is the island. I think it's the island's always been fascinating because it's never an embrace of a government. It's always a very contentious place. We're on our own. We don't let anybody tell us what to do. You go back to 2015, and at the height of Trudeau-mania too, there were zero seats that went liberal in the island. They stopped with the NDP. There's places that had voted for reform in the past and have voted conservative. They elected the first Green in the history of the country. So there's this way in which the island looks at things that is different from everything else. And right now, they're not really keen on the NDP. You have ridings, particularly Mid Island and the North, that are now solidly conservative, at least in the way in which the numbers are looking right now. And if you have a shift like the one we're seeing at the national level in Victoria, where you have the over 55 voter very concerned about Trump and voting for the Liberals instead of the NDP, Victoria could go red. We haven't seen that in 20 years.
Yeah, I mean, you and I talked about this several times that we've been on. That like the stink from Justin Trudeau is really left onto Jagmeet Singh because he's the only one really left in the front of that bus. But and that seems to be playing out. Like, I mean, there's a lot of anger towards the Trudeau Liberals, but they don't really attach it to Carney. They're attaching it to Jagmeet Singh.
Well, I think when you look back at the success of the Conservatives, 2011 particularly, a very strong NDP with Jack Layton certainly helps them because you get a little bit of that liberal vote that isn't really keen on the NDP. That's what enables them to win the majority back in 2011. I think the Conservatives made a mistake in coming down on Jagmeet Singh so hard. Sellout Singh, and he's only in it for the pension. Right now, they need some of those undecided voters to go to the NDP if they want to hold on to some of those ridings or ride the situation through the middle, which is pretty much what is happening in the island. You have the NDP dropping from their share of support from the last election, a lot of that going to the Liberals. It benefits the NDP, the Conservatives to win those seats. But it's not something that is playing out at the same rate everywhere else, and that is definitely something that is going to be a cause for concern at the end. It's not about dropping the NDP to 7 seats if the seats that they're losing are not going to go to the Conservatives.
So the Bloc, again, a bit of a wild card in this whole thing, because it looked like at one point that they were going to be the official opposition, and then since then they've dropped off quite a bit. But his performance at the debates seemed to be a fairly reasonable guy. Obviously, he's always slanted towards Quebec. Do you think that the 2 debates helped him?
I think he really was seeking an opportunity to say to people, don't worry, we think that Carney is going to form the government and send more people that represent Quebec to the House of Commons. It's a good strategy to have. I think it's something that Gilles Duceppe used to do before. A lot of people don't really look at Francois Blanchet outside of Quebec, only during debates. And he's channeling a little bit of what Duceppe had in the early stages of his career. He seems nice. He seems somebody who's interested. He's not talking about sovereignty as openly. But the biggest problem is their hardcore sovereignist base. Your basic voter over 55 who has always supported the Bloc is now looking at Carney and saying, look, let's save the country we belong to right now because of all of the concerns related to Donald Trump. And then after Carney gets elected, then we try to figure out where to go with sovereignty. So that is definitely problematic. He used to appeal to people with the guise of sovereignty down the road. But now these voters are looking at Mark Carney and saying, this is the person we want dealing with Donald Trump. Once that is out of the way, then we can talk about referendums.
Does it seem like, though, that Blanchet was going at Carney mostly, though? Like, it seemed like, to me, like he was more amicable towards Poilievre, and if maybe they would form a coalition government.
Well, that's also part of something that will be interesting to watch. If the election is close and there's an opportunity of a minority for somebody, who is he going to try to work with? I think you're right. There was a moment when he was really hammering in on Carney. It wasn't a particularly great debate as far as the way in which they interacted with each other, even though it was, very well moderated. But it's a complicated aspect when you're the one who is appealing to a very small group of people. And ultimately, I think Blanchet's voters watched the debate the previous night. They were more interested in the French one than the English one.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And the only thing they needed there for Jagmeet was the mute button a few times, right?
Well, it's weird to me because, he was the one, along with Blanchet, who had been there before. So you kind of know where this is going. You have to be ready with some of those sound bites and some of those bits that you're going to be speaking about. I think he tried to get a couple of singers across, but it's very hard to do that when the level of support that you have across the country is not where it used to be. And, the fact that nobody engaged with him directly, I think sends a much more powerful message. If you're Carney or Poilievre, why are you engaging with the guy whose party is in single digits?
Do you think maybe a bit of his ego got in the way? Because, where he's losing his base is to the Liberals, but he seemed to spend his energy on the Conservatives. And it just seems like that might be like a bit of a dislike for the person as opposed to what's really like strategic for the party.
I think it's a combination of both. And, part of what makes this difficult for him is he's appealing to the opposition voter. And it's so tough to do this in an election like this one. You have Carney running as an outsider, despite of the fact that he represents the party that's in power right now. And you're essentially saying, send more people like me and the other NDP members of parliament to Ottawa. We will be there to fight for you. I think the story of the NDP's campaign can be told through the radio ads that they're running in the Metro Vancouver area. It started off with, we can form the government, and it's now closing with, let's keep 5 or 6 or as many as our guys.
Yeah.
And
survival. Now it's in
So
survival mode. Really, I mean, Jagmeet Singh might lose his seat, and the same as Elizabeth May. And it seems like, you know,
it's a very tough seat. I mean, there's a couple of things that have happened. The boundaries changed a little bit, but back in 2015, at the height of Trudomania 2, Kennedy Stewart won that seat barely over Adam Pankratz. And this is with the Liberals polling at 35% in BC. Now they're at 42. So the chances of Singh holding on to that Singh are pretty slim.
yeah. Any in your most recent poll, what does it look like to you for as far as a government being formed?
Well, it still certainly favors the Liberals. I think for a couple of reasons. The lead in Ontario is at 6 points. If it grows to 8 or 10 in the final stages, it's going to be almost over. The other issue is the Bloc isn't recovering as quickly as people expected. We still have 2 voters for the Liberals for every voter for the Bloc. And this would certainly suggest that some Bloc ridings fall into the hands of the Liberals. If that's the case, then by the time we get to Manitoba, you might have enough to form a government, maybe even a majority government. And the other problem is the Conservatives are running the numbers in Alberta to levels that we haven't seen. I mean, we had them at 65%. It's not going to help you because they're going to get the same number of seats. There might be some beneficiaries out there. But the real story for me is going to be what happens in BC, because if the Liberals can hold on to the level of support that they have and finish ahead of the Conservatives, that would be a number that we haven't seen for the Liberal Party in British Columbia since Pierre Trudeau in 1968. Trudeau mania with Justin Trudeau in 2015 was 35%. They're at 42, 43%. That would be historic.
So the demographics definitely shift for the 55 plus to the Liberals, and then the, like underneath it's kind of shifts towards the Conservatives. To me, it seems to be a bit upside down from the past, right? The gray hairs used to support the Conservatives, and now it's kind of gone the other way. How much do you put into like a lot of people on the internet, and they're calling for this blue wave that's kind of this hidden blue wave that's going to happen? We see that the advanced polls are huge. Like, I mean, that's a record in the advanced polls, 7.3 million out of like 29 million eligible voters. So that's pretty big. And then they're saying that some of the polls are slanted towards more of an older audience. I don't know. What do you say to all that?
Well, if it's properly designed and properly weighted, it has to make sense to be representative of the country as a whole. It's odd because part of what happens has to do with voter turnout patterns, and we know that the over 55s tend to vote more than the 18 to 34s. This is similar to what we saw here in British Columbia back in October. The younger cohort was reacting way better to John Rostad and the BC Conservatives, and the over 55s were looking at the NDP as the de facto status quo party. It would have made your head explode in 2001, 2005. It's completely different. But part of this, I think it has a lot to do with the ability of the parties to get the vote out. Not that you will necessarily require it in an election where so many people are interested and engaged. I'm still hoping that we have a turnout that is closer to the one we had in the 1980s. But even with that, it's a different type of voter that the Conservatives need to get out. They're used to the over 55s, give you a call, drive you to the polls, make sure that you voted, reassure you. The 18 to 34-year-old is not going to react that easily. And I think that is also part of what makes this election so compelling, because there's different challenges for the two leading parties. The Liberals used to be the party that benefited from people who said anything but conservative, and I'll make my final decision in the latter stages of the campaign. And the Conservatives used to benefit from the very stern, steady, over 55 voter that they had called for 5 or 6 times during the campaign and ultimately drove them to the polls. Now they're attracting the opposites. So it's going to be fun to watch how that plays out on election day.
So does this all come down to Ontario, do you think, though?
Well, it usually does. I mean, it's sad to say. I was joking the other day that maybe we should count the votes starting in BC, so we matter for at least a few minutes or a few hours during the election night. Of course, the time difference makes that impossible. But part of it is going to be because of how much Ontario changed. Back in the first week of January, with Justin Trudeau still as Prime Minister, the level of support for the Conservatives in Ontario was 50 something percent. I think it was 52 or 53%. That's enough. And the reality is, you have so many people who are second guessing their choices after Justin Trudeau left. And a lot of it has to do with Donald Trump. I mean, to see almost 30% of Canadians saying my number one issue is Canada-US relations, that wasn't even on the radar back in November. So a lot of it is a reaction to Trump. And again, we always talk about American elections with their October surprise. Will there be something in the next 3 days that shifts voters? Not the ones who already cast their ballot, but if Trump tweets something, if Carney says something, if Poilievre says something, if there's something out there that sort
I,
of moves the needle.
I think the budgets or the plans that got dropped, I don't think they helped Mark Carney much. I think the plan did not look that good to many of the economists out there. I mean, there's definitely some blowback on that, and I think he's on his back heels on that one. But I don't know how much that affects the gray hairs in looking at that budget. But it sounds like a lot more debt for a lot of people.
Well, I think that's also changed in a way. A lot of what drove, particularly here in British Columbia, the BC Liberal voter who steadfastly supported Gordon Campbell 3 times and gave him 3 majorities. That group was all about not running deficits. And now the over 55s of today are no longer as concerned with some of those matters. And I think that is also part of what has made the connection from Pierre Poilievre to the over 55 crowd so difficult. One of them, one of the issues is Donald Trump, obviously, but the other one is, when you run a campaign based on reducing red tape and not running a deficit, it's not going to resonate in the same way that it did 20, 25 years ago.
And then there's some comparisons out there and saying, in the American election, that there was the polls were showing that Kamala had a pretty good lead in that, and then obviously didn't show up, and that a lot of young people turned out for Trump, and they're saying that same thing is kind of playing out here in Canada. Any thoughts on that?
Well, it's a little bit different. I think part of what you saw in the States, and the difference in most of the surveys that were conducted, including my own, it's 1 or 2 points for either of the candidates. It's a statistical tie at the national level, and ultimately Trump manages to win the popular vote. But it's something that is statistically sound. I think it's more problematic when you look at it from the standpoint of the specific states where things are supposed to happen. And again, it was essentially a statistical tie. I mean, you look at Pennsylvania, you look at Wisconsin, you look at Michigan, a couple of points here or there, which is still mathematically valid. This one is different because if we had a lead for the Liberals of a couple of points or even 3 points, that would certainly herald a closer race. But part of what is happening is where that level of support has been concentrated. And because of the way in which the votes usually fall, and again, all bets are off because we could have a significantly higher turnout driven by young people. But if you look at past elections, the Conservatives need to be a couple of points ahead. We looked at 2021 and 2019 where they finished ahead of the Liberals in total votes, but they can't get the seats where they need to. So I think they're aware of that. You got to be 3 or 4 or 5 points ahead of the Liberals to form the government. And because of the because of the way in which the NDP vote is coalescing around the Liberals, this makes it even more complicated.
Yeah, no, it's an interesting time for sure, and we'll come right down to the wire, I believe. So, but in the United States, Pennsylvania, you talked about that when we talked prior to the election. Pennsylvania was the key, and they focus the Republicans focus heavily in Pennsylvania, including with Elon Musk there spending a lot of time standing on stage, and they knew that Pennsylvania was their key. Where do you think the Carney camp will spend its time, and Poilievre will spend his time, and Jagmeet's obviously at home trying to spend his time just to rescue, to kind of salvage something, but where does Poilievre and Carney need to spend their time?
I think they both can look at BC as the prize. To have Mark Carney in the island now, I think they believe that they can get the Victoria riding, which is definitely possible. There's a chance as well for the Liberals to maybe go to Edmonton and try to close the deal there, see if you can wrestle some of the ridings from the NDP. I think that the two ridings that are crucial for the Conservatives are the two Richmond ridings, because you have a significant component of East Asian voters who like the message on tough on crime, who are deeply dismayed at the drug legalization overtures. That is a group that they desperately need to get into. But a lot of this really depends on the way Ontario moves, and to a lesser extent if the Bloc comes back. The Bloc coming back 2 or 3 points, or even 4 or 5 points in the final stages, definitely benefits the Conservatives, not because they're going to win those seats by coming through the middle,
Right.
but because you get to Ontario and Manitoba and it's still a close race.
Yeah, I think that's bang on. And where do you think the Atlantic provinces are going?
Well,
Because they
the
looked
level
like
of
they were going to go
support,
blue for a while, but
yeah, well, it's really astonishing. I mean, you look at an area like Atlantic Canada, and the level of support for the Conservatives was exceedingly high at the start of the year. I think Carney's figured out a way to connect with that population. They're also more likely to be worried about housing than other parts of the country. 2015 was an interesting case because there was the expectation that the Conservatives would hold on to maybe 4 or 5 ridings. They lost all of them. And if we are into the start of the campaign or the vote counting process with a similar scenario, then that certainly speaks about the size of the wave. But I think it's more important for the Conservatives to try to figure out where they can get this. And part of the problem is the fundamentally urban nature of the Liberals. I'll go to Toronto, I'll go to Vancouver, I'll go to Montreal, and this is where I'm going to get most of the seats that I require. So you need to run the numbers somewhere else and try to figure out where you're going to be knocking on those doors. I think the Conservatives feel pretty good about the splits benefiting them in the island and maybe some other ridings, particularly in the Okanagan, but it might not be enough in the end.
yeah, the advance vote though, 7.3, I think it is 7.3 million. I mean, almost double, right? Close to double. Who do you think that favors?
It's so tough to tell because I saw people, and we waited 85 minutes to vote in Vancouver. We voted on Good Friday. And you see everything. It's not like you're seeing a specific demographic lining up or a specific type of voter. And usually long lineups mean that the incumbent is in danger, but where's the incumbent? Mark Carney is running as an outsider. He's saying that he's not part of this.
Hmm.
It also, I think, speaks about the way in which Canadians, particularly after the pandemic, have become more used to taking advantage of the opportunities to vote early. It might just be, I'll be busy on Monday, I'll be doing something else, I'll be away on the weekend, I don't know if I'll have time. I'd rather do this now that I have a little bit of time, especially because, nobody works on Good Friday, and you have that weekend to try to figure out if this is the right course of action. Now, if this pans out the same way that it did back in 2021, would be looking at a voter turnout rate of 75%, which would be amazing. It would be the highest that we've had since 1988. But how much of that is just people realizing, especially after the pandemic, oh, I can vote by mail, I can vote by special ballot, I can vote a couple of days earlier and just get it over with.
But that's pretty significant, though. I mean, that number, the increase is almost 100% increase. So that's a pretty big jump for people. And usually they don't change their minds that much on certain things. People are traditionally fairly lazy, I think. But
Well,
who knows, right?
who knows? And I think part of what is should be analyzed is should we have a different way of voting? We've seen the embrace of technology in provincial races for tabulation, in municipal races for the actual counting of the ballots. We're still going with pencil and paper. It seems to be the best way to go, but you have other jurisdictions where they're trying to do something different, and maybe that is something that they should be considering.
Well, here's my idea: is that everything's on your iPhone and you vote for everything. We don't have a government. We vote on everything.
Well, that's also part of the problem with the idea of having a referendum for every tax cut. Elections are expensive.
Yeah, very expensive.
You go back to 2021, the price tag for that election was $574 million. Are you going to spend $500 million every time you want to hike taxes?
No, that's what I'm saying. You put it on your iPhone, and then you just every wake up in the morning, and you just pick your 2 or 3 issues, right?
Well, there's places where it's working. You know, Estonia has, and again, very different situation, smaller nation, fewer people, but they've been voting online since I think 2008 or something, and no allegations of fraud, even though they're next door to Russia.
Well, I mean, to be fair, the Liberals basically picked their leader online.
It's true.
So there you go. Obviously worked for them. But yeah, elections are very expensive to do for sure. And any predictions or just too close to call?
Well, it's more, I think what makes this so tough is there's really 2 ways to go. And because of the way the campaign has been structured, you're either going to see a tightening of the numbers, your basic NDP Green voter, Bloc voter going back to the fold, assuming that their vote for Carney is no longer as required as it used to be, and then we're in for a closer race. Or you have a larger proportion of people saying, okay, our parties are done, we might as well ensure that Mark Carney has a majority. But it's difficult for the Conservatives because you're not depending on people moving to you. And I think that is part of what makes this election so hard for them. In any other moment, to be at 38%, they'd be jumping for joy. And right now, is this our ceiling? Is everything we're going to see either coming out of the 43% that the Liberals have and going back to the Greens, the Bloc, or the NDP? Or are we going to have, the NDP at 3%? Because everybody flocked to the Liberals. So either of those 2 scenarios is plausible.
There you go. And then any thoughts on the Green hanging on to their seats?
I think Elizabeth May has a good shot at staying there. There's a fundamental knowledge of the intricacies of the riding that has been crucial for her victories before. Even in the last election where the Greens were going nowhere, Annamie Paul didn't have a great couple of debates, and they managed to do this. I think there's an opportunity for that to happen, but Jagmeet Singh's riding is certainly more complicated. And maybe that's the story that we're going to be covering here late night. A couple of leaders, one co-leader now, but the leader of the third party in the House of Commons, conceivably losing his seat.
Maybe Tom Mulcahy take it back.
Well, I think this really calls for a larger conversation about where the NDP goes from here.
Yeah.
Would you be better off? It's similar to what happened with the Progressive Conservatives in a way. Do we have more in common with the Liberals than we think? And is it a good opportunity to try to extend the hand and say, we'll support you in some things, maybe we should merge, we'll talk about it differently? It's tough to have that conversation when you're at 17 or 21% of the vote. When you're at 7 or 8, it's time to have it.
Yeah. Well, I do thank you for your time. It'll be an interesting night for sure. We're going to be live streaming all night long. I'm sure you're going to be on a few shows as well, but we'll be live streaming right till the end to see who wins this race. And, the American election went a lot quicker than we thought because we thought that was going to go into weeks, right? Like that was decided that night. And I'm assuming that this one should go, that night as well. But who knows?
Well, we just came off the BC election where we were waiting and waiting and waiting to declare a government, and it took a while.
That one took a while for sure.
Anything can happen.
Yeah, and that one took quite a while actually, right? Anyway, I do thank you for your time, Mario, and maybe we'll get together after this is all over and we'll see what actually played out.
Yes, exactly.
All right, thank you, Mario.
Thank you, Jim.
All right, thank you for watching Now Media Group.
We don't just report the news, we live here too. We're your neighbors, bringing you stories that matter to all of us. No government funding, no outside influence. Kelowna Now, local, independent. News you